Hello everyone, my name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today we are continuing our BDSM 101 series, and specifically we are going to be talking about hair pulling. This originally came up during a live stream that I had a few weeks ago, which, by the way, on this channel here on YouTube, every Friday at 6 p.m. PST, we have an interactive Q&A live stream. It's a lot of fun, but anyways, on that particular day, somebody asked about hair pulling techniques, and I kind of went like, wow, how have I never made a video about this? Because it's so common and it's so popular, and I just didn't really understand how it had skipped me all of these years doing YouTube. And I asked everyone, like, would you be interested in a full-on video about this? Like, what do you guys want to know? And everyone was like, yes, absolutely, please do it. We want a video about this. So here we are, we're talking about hair pulling. Now, what I find really interesting about hair pulling is most people don't even really think about it as a BDSM activity. It is so common, even more so than a lot of the things that I've covered so far in the BDSM 101 series, to the point where people kind of see it as like a rough sex act rather than like a kink thing. Now, if you spend any amount of time on BDSM YouTube, you will doubtlessly see comments along the lines of, you know, I didn't really get this whole BDSM thing. I mean, I like rough sex. I like a little hair pulling, a little choking, a little spanking, but like nothing this extreme. This goes way too far. And it's so interesting to me that people have that perspective because, one, I'm asexual, so even classifying something like hair pulling as purely something that happens during sex is like kind of a little bit outside of my own personal framework. But then also what gets classed as like rough sex versus BDSM doesn't really seem to be based on any evaluation of overall risk level, but rather on like a perception of who does these activities and why and where these activities occur. So what I want to do today in this video is, obviously we're going to talk about hair pulling, but some techniques that you should keep in mind, kind of the sort of best or better practices versus what you might see a lot of images of online, and kind of talking about maybe how some of these images might lead to like false ideas about how to engage in hair pulling, you know, why people like it, how you can incorporate it into different aspects of BDSM, and all that good stuff. So let's go ahead and get into it. The first thing I want to talk about are images of hair pulling online, because oh my gosh, when I was researching for this video, I obviously Googled BDSM hair pulling because I was interested to see what came up and maybe sort of what myths or experiences other people would have about this area. And if you go to the images tab on Google with like the safe search turned off and you're just looking at like BDSM hair pulling, oh my god, some of the images on there, they're not just horrifying because I think it's a little bit too extreme, but like, this is probably going to give people the wrong idea about what hair pulling is like, because a lot of these images are like a guy in a suit holding on to women, like one in each hand by their ponytails and like dragging them down like a long alleyway, or, you know, up a flight of stairs, or it's like a POV thing where there's a girl on her stomach and they have like their hair gripped by like the end of a ponytail by like a single guy's hand, and I'm like, that's not really how like hair pulling is typically done. And what's important to remember about these images is that like 99% of them are staged photographs where no force is actually being applied. There's actually a lot of stage techniques that you can use, especially if you're familiar with theater, that can make it look like hair pulling is happening even when there's no actual real pressure being applied, because the person who is on the receiving end of the hair pulling experience is actually cooperating with what's happening. And that's not necessarily what happens in BDSM play, but it does happen a lot for photographs, because obviously models usually don't want to have all of their hair ripped out, and so they're not generally going to be engaging in play that would make that likely to happen, because then they could lose their careers as models. So when you see images of any BDSM activity, I always encourage skepticism, because a lot of them are, again, staged and may not necessarily accurately reflect something that real people do in BDSM situations, or actually reflect what good safety techniques are. So the big thing I want to get across right here is that, like, if you see something where somebody has their hair like pulled way out here, no. Now, I'm not going to tell anybody what they can and can't consent to. If you are aware that this is not the best possible technique and for some reason you enjoy doing this and everybody involved is aware of the additional risk that this technique presents, by all means, go ahead and do it. I'm not the BDSM police, but I want to make sure that people are aware there are other options out there besides just pulling the hair at the very, very ends and just yanking on it as hard as humanly possible, because there are a lot of really good options besides that. Now, what I would generally recommend for hair pulling is, besides just pulling at the ends like that, what you actually typically want to do is you want to have the hair at the very back of the neck. And rather than just yanking from the end, you want to take your hand, kind of form it into a claw, run it up the back of the neck and scalp. By the way, very good sensation play. A lot of people really enjoy this, and it can be a good connective experience for a scene. And you basically just want to hold the hair at the roots. You don't want to have it be really far out at the ends of the hair, because that is more likely to cause breakage. Now, everybody has different hair types. I am personally somebody who has a very sensitive scalp. I am of Caucasian, origin, and I also have very, very thin hair. Generally speaking, the hair at the back of my head is thicker than the hair at the front, and generally that's true for most people. The hair around the back of the head and the neck is going to be a lot sturdier and a lot more deeply rooted, from what I read, than the hair at the front. So you mostly want to be grabbing from the back of the hair. I'm not sure if you have non-Caucasian hair, how that would work, if there's any additional considerations, but I will leave that up to the people who have those hair types to explain how it works for them, because I am not an expert there by any means. But generally, pulling from the back is going to be a lot better of an idea. In the context of a scene, this also presents, I think, a lot more from my experience as having dominant control, because you are doing this in a very controlled, methodical way. And as well, when you are using this technique, it gives you a lot more control over the head and over the neck. So if you are doing something where you're just yanking this way, or even from the back, you have a lot less fine control in a safe way over where the body, where the head is going, rather than when you're doing this from the neck, you have a lot more control. And I'm using very, very light pressure, and I'm also doing this on myself, obviously. We have a lot more control over where the head is going and in what direction, which again can be very good. You can even do this to where you can use this as a force to help force a submissive into a kneeling position, or give them an indication that it's time to stand. Now, what's important to keep in mind here is, regardless of kind of what purpose you are doing this movement with, you do it in such a way where you are using the lightest amount of force necessary to produce the desired result. I think there's a lot of appeal and get a lot of images out there of people who are just very forcibly and suddenly grabbing the hair and then yanking it back. And actually, there was a post on Tumblr, which, because Tumblr no longer allows not safe for work content, I can't find it anymore, unfortunately, but there was a very famous post where basically what happened is, if I remember correctly, the submissive partner walked through the door one day coming home from work, and the dominant partner decided to surprise them with the scene by pulling on the back of their head so hard. And from what I can tell, they otherwise used proper technique, but they yanked on it so hard that it actually ended up almost breaking their neck, literally. So this is a risky form of play. And the way to mitigate that risk is to be very aware of the amount of force that you're using and what direction you're using that force in. If you are doing something particularly where you're forcing the neck up like this, and you can even hear in my voice now, this is straining my voice to do this, not super great technique. If you want somebody to look up at you, the better way to do this, in my opinion, is you don't have to necessarily go directly from the back of the head, but you can also do this coming up from the sides and kind of parting the hair half and half. And you can use this to kind of, distribute the pressure a little bit more equilaterally to kind of gently nod the head up. And this has an additional level of control with less force being exerted on having the neck go into this position. And again, you can use very, very light force to produce this result. And also as well, if you have a submissive that is prone to, or I'm also using submissive in this a lot, but any S-type, bottom, whatever label you prefer, insert here. you know, if you have somebody who's bratting and fighting a lot, also be very mindful of that as well, because you can easily end up in a situation where if they're struggling a lot and if you have your hand controlling the neck, they can spin themselves into a position where they are causing injuries to themselves, or you are facilitating the cause of injury. Not wanting to necessarily assign blame to any sort of theoretical situation there, but that's basically what you want to keep in mind as far as that's concerned. So I would not really recommend, again, kind of a really hard yank that's kind of going in this backwards or downwards direction. What's more effective is either pulling up or to one side or the other. All of this is risky play, but I find that the side to side or forward or upward motion is less risky than the downwards or backward motion. If you want to do something where you are leading the partner down into a sitting or into a kneeling position, you can also do this a little bit where you're sort of simulating grabbing from the front without actually grabbing the front hairs. Obviously, I have bangs, so like if you want to just yank on my bangs, like, first of all, why? Second of all, not very effective. If you want to do something like this, what you can do instead is you can have kind of two hands working at the same time, where you have one that's kind of pulling up the hair around the neck, up towards the back of the head, and you're having a hand coming from the front and pulling down into that. And that can be something you use to kind of do more of the forward motion or downward motion, kind of leading into a sit position. And you're still mostly incorporating the hair from the back without necessarily incorporating all the hair from the front, even though you were starting out in a position where maybe you were facing towards the person whose hair you were grabbing rather than approaching from the back. And that can be good as well because it allows a moment for connection, it allows a moment to check in and really understand exactly how much force you are using. Generally speaking, with all this as well, it's usually better to grab more surface area than less, and that can help reduce overall breakage of the hair, because if you're just pulling on one strand of hair or one very, very small area, that is going to concentrate all of the force into that one little area, making breakage and more intense pain more likely, as opposed to using more surface area that's going to distribute that more and overall most likely produce a more enjoyable sensation. A lot of people do enjoy doing hair pulling incorporated with things like ponytails or pigtails or buns or other forms of hair doodads and styling that I don't really know how to do. But you can also do this when you have your partner's hair already in some kind of updo. So when you are doing this, and you have somebody with their hair, say, already in a ponytail, as long as it's not pulled too tightly at the base, you can still kind of lace your fingers through and still grab in the same way you would as though the hair was down. Same thing for if you have pigtails on the side, you can do a very similar thing. Something you can do as well if you want an additional level of control or intensity of sensation is you can kind of wrap the ponytail or the pigtail into the fist that you're creating around the hair. Now with this, all of the pressure is still originating from the roots of the hair and on the scalp. The hair that's actually in the ponytail, the ends of the hair, I'm basically kind of weaving that into like around the fingers and into the inside part of the fist, but it's not actually producing any additional sensation on the end parts of that hair. So you can still incorporate the pigtails and the ponytails that way, or braids or buns or whatever you have, but you don't end up actually pulling on the ends of the hair itself, which again can produce more breakage, produces a less controlled sensation, and overall it's just kind of generally less pleasant from my experience, again being somebody who has a relatively sensitive scalp. Now I've mostly been talking about hair pulling here from the perspective of like rougher or like controlled like DS type play, where you're wanting to really force somebody to go into one direction, or you are maybe trying to obtain control during a grappling situation. And all of those forms of play obviously should be negotiated and are a little bit outside the scope of this video to go into more specific detail on how to do. But hair pulling doesn't just have to be a rough sex thing or a rough body play thing or a control thing. It can actually also be a really soothing thing as well. One of the interesting things I came across while I was researching for this video is actual hair pulling massage. And so maybe this can be something that either leads you into a more sensual type of scene, playing with sensation, or it could also be a form of aftercare. And the principle is somewhat similar because you're kind of wanting to activate the sensation again along the scalp, along the root of the hair. And basically what you do is you run your fingers up and you kind of start to create like a high ponytail or like a bun on the top of the head, and you just run your fingers through that, or you can run them through the back. You can kind of alternate. You can do this standing up or lying down, but you're kind of almost created like a very, 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 very light pulling sensation, but you're not actually yanking on anything. You're not adding any additional force. You're just kind of doing the hands running through stage of this technique, which for a lot of people can be very pleasant. Now, what I want to end this video on, now that my hair is all freaking crazy, is I want to talk about short hair specifically. So if you have been on my channel for a while, you have seen my hair transformation. I think the last time I wore this shirt in a video was actually one that I did with Brittany Simon like 2 years ago, right after I had my partner cut off all my hair, and my hair was like here. So I have had all manner of hair lengths while being in BDSM relationships. And I know that some people are concerned about the hair being too short, but as long as it's not in a buzz cut and your hair isn't super, super sparse, you can probably engage in some kind of scalp-related play. Now, I don't scientifically know exactly how much hair that you need, but if we were to take my bangs, again, for an example, you can already see that even with only that much hair, there is still a root to grab onto and some hair coming out the top. So you really don't need, probably I would say, more than like an inch or two of hair to really be able to engage in this sensation. Obviously, when you have more hair, that is probably going to produce something that's more intense or especially easier to grab onto, but it is by no means the exclusive realm of people who have a lot of hair. Now, the last sort of section here that I really want to make sure I cover is just the emphasis on safety, because I've already kind of touched on it in a few places, but I really, really want to make it obvious because of how common this type of play is, that this is a serious form of play. This can and does result in permanent injury and potential death if you do this incorrectly. Even doing it correctly, if you are in a situation where maybe there's like, I don't know, an earthquake that causes something to knock into you when you're doing this, that causes like extra force to be exerted, like there are things that can happen that can cause injury as a result of this. Mild or minor, temporary or lifelong, things can happen. So that means, again, when you're pulling, be careful about the neck. Be very careful about basically everything on your head. Everything in your neck is very delicate. So again, just be careful with how much force you're using and what direction you're using that force in. Practice on yourself so you kind of know how much force you need to do to produce a certain level of sensation. And as well, when you are engaging in hair pulling, there are some certain factors you might want to consider medically that could impact your ability to engage in this type of play. Now, those things would be like alopecia, or if you have any medication that causes hair thinning, if you already have significant hair loss, if you generally have really, really high scalp sensitivity, or you have anything that really affects your scalp and your hair. Depending on what that is, you are either going to want to take additional precautions, you're going to want to take things more slowly, or you may decide that engaging in this type of play is not for you altogether. Now, if you are pulling from the roots and the base of the hair, it is generally less likely that that will produce hair breakage than simply pulling on like random little end bits of the hair. This is not to say that breakage won't happen. That depends on your own hair, how thin it is, if it's chemically treated, if you take good care of it, how hydrated it is, any other conditions you might have, are all your vitamin levels kind of where they should be, how healthy your hair is. All those things can affect it. So I recommend before you go into this like full hog and you decide to do this like every day, make sure that you're taking things slowly. Try it out for short periods at a time. You don't need to do hair pulling for 2 hours. You can do it for like, 10-15 seconds. See how it feels. Check to see, have I accidentally pulled out like a giant chunk of my partner's hair? And you can decide from there how much you decide you want to engage in this type of play. Now, as always, these BDSM 101 videos are kind of meant to be like an introduction, an overview to this type of play. This is not a full safety guide. I am not an expert. I am not a hairstylist. I am not an esthetician. I am not a dermatologist. I am not anybody who is qualified necessarily to talk about like long-term damage to hair follicles and things of that variety. So I highly recommend that you do your own research about this type of play. If you are in a position to take classes, to learn from others in a local community setting, I highly recommend that you seek out things, particularly when it comes to areas such as these, where having additional instruction and one-on-one feedback can be really helpful. So again, just make sure you do your research, check in with your partner, and don't be afraid to decide if something's not for you. Anyways, if you guys have any other comments or questions about hair pulling, please let me know down in the comment section below. If you have any other suggestions for BDSM 101 topics I should cover, please let me know as well. If you really like this video, if you want to see more from me, I highly recommend you subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I make videos twice a week. And finally, if you really enjoy my work, if you want to support this channel, the best place you can do that is over on Patreon. That is what makes videos like this possible. That is why I'm able to try out like crazy new lighting setups, and it has just so greatly changed the way that I do YouTube, and it allows me to make a lot of extra content as well. So there's extra photo shoots and bonus videos and content that I can't post here on YouTube. All that ends up over on Patreon. So if you haven't already, please check that out. Link is down in the description box below. If you already support me on there, thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you guys next time, hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.